Hey guys, this is Wolfie D from PG-13. Check out my podcast, Live and in Color with Wolfie D, every Monday at noon. We're talking Memphis, we're talking ECW, WCW, WWF, everywhere that I've been. We even have some great guests, some Hall of Famers on the show with us. Every Monday at noon, Live and in Color with Wolfie D.
Welcome back to another edition of the Retro Rasslin Podcast. I'm your host, Gene Jackson, and I'm very excited today to be joined by the one and only Davey Rich. Mr. Rich, how you doing today?
Man, I'm doing great, Gene. I tell you what, I've admired all your work from afar, and excited to be here. Excited to talk a little old school wrestling. I'm living in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Oh,
and
okay.
It was a hotbed back in the day with Mid-South, and I actually wrestled me and a buddy of mine from Memphis when WCW was going strong. Me and him wrestled the Hollywood Blondes, Stone Cold and Brian Pillman here in the Cajun Dome. So I got a lot of fond memories of this area.
Awesome. Well, we've got the Retro Rasslin Network over on YouTube, and we're going to be putting up some matches of yours over the next week or so. We've got a few on there now. We're going to be putting up stuff from Continental, USA, Memphis, WCW, WWF, the whole gamut. So,
all right. I think you mentioned
everything.
You know, the one thing I haven't ever tried to research. I did a run even down in Puerto Rico. Eddie Gilbert got me down there, and unfortunately, Eddie passed before I made it.
Right.
And so Ken Wayne took over the book, and I went, and I would say I made it 10 weeks or so. But man, first time ever working as a heel.
Oh.
And they were pushing the daylights out of me. And man, there just wasn't much to do down there. I mean, everybody think Puerto Rico, and I was making good money, actually even a little more than they guaranteed me. And but man, I think I might have made it 10, 12 weeks, and I snuck back. I didn't even tell poor Ken Wayne I was leaving. I was gone.
I'm going to do some research on that and see if there's any footage. I'd love to see some of that. Puerto Rico was kind of a bizarro world down there where, guys like, Wendell Cooley and Frankie Lancaster, who was beloved up here, they went down there and had a good heel run as the Heartbreakers. So kind of strange to see some of you guys that were beloved in my neck of the woods to go down there and be heels.
Well, my whole understanding was that, that I was coming for a year. In the first 6 months, I'd be a heel, and then they'd do some sort of deal, and they were going to try to bring Tommy in and, switch me babyface. Because, I mean, I tell you, I grew up in Memphis, and, I don't know how much. Where did you grow up at, Gene?
I grew up in Aberdeen, Mississippi, right smack dab between Tupelo and Columbus.
I know exactly where it is. So you probably caught, Mid-South. I mean, not Mid-South. You might even call it Mid-South, but I'm sure you probably caught Continental / Southeastern and maybe even the outskirts of Memphis.
Yeah, see, we had WMC, so we got Memphis and we got Continental on WCBI out of Columbus. I didn't get Mid-South. I didn't get to see that until I started tape trading years later, which I kept up with it through the magazines. And so that was one of the things I was going to ask you about is, I knew you as David Haskins from Memphis TV.
Right.
And then lo and behold, turns out you're Johnny and Tommy's cousin. All of a sudden, Davey Rich shows up in Continental.
Well,
I'm like, he looks
I tell you what, I'll give you a quick background. So I started in Memphis. My very first match. Well, I'm even going to back up. I was playing football for Memphis State. Okay. And this is kind of funny. A guy named Mike Stark Mike was the very first humongous. He's a big All-American offensive lineman for Memphis State. And man, he could move. He was really good. And of course, he was working against Lawler, and Lawler can make anybody look good. So
Right.
Vince, now this is just hearsay. I heard that he's one of the first guys that Vince tried to give a big contract to, but his dad was a doctor. He was a football coach, great football coach, legendary. Was coaching at Christian Brothers till just a year or two ago. I think he's retired now. But he basically turned them down, and he came out to a practice, and I knew that he had been in the business. And so, man, I went, and he goes, I said, man, I had the mullet. I could see that I was never going to play much. I was an option quarterback, and I was probably 210, and he looks at me and goes, man, you got the look to you. I said, I've watched it my whole life. I lived in a little town called Senatobia, Mississippi,
Oh
and
yeah.
my stepfather was a carpenter, and he had built me a ring in the backyard, and all my buddies and anybody that's 60 years old knows about that ring. We'd get out there and kill each other. It's a wonder somebody didn't die out there. I mean, we were hitting each other with chains and chairs, and I mean, it was no work to it at all. It was all a shoot. We were shoot wrestling before they had phones to put it on the internet. But so he told me, he goes, man, here's what you do. Go down to the Mid-South Coliseum. When you pull in, you're going to see a gate. That's where all the wrestlers park. Now, if you stop, they're not going to let you in. But if you'll just wave, go park, walk right in the back like you know what you're doing, take the first right and then the next right, and Lawler's office is right there. I knew no better. I pull in, I wave at these guys, they all wave. It's 20 policemen standing there. They all wave. I park, I walk in the back, and I walk in there, and Lawler looks at me and goes, what in the hell? Who are you? And I told him, and he dies laughing. And so I kind of told him my story, and he's a big football fan. He loves sports, and
Yeah.
we just clicked just like that. I mean, we just had I don't know, we just got along great. So first he called Coco Ware over there, and Coco gave me his spiel, but he wanted to train me, but he could only train me on Mondays because he was on doing the Memphis
Right.
Loop. And
Yeah.
then he brought in the Dream Machine, Troy Graham, and Troy threw his little spiel on me. And then he brought in Cowboy Don Bass. Now, Donnie had a place set up over in West Memphis. He trained a lot of people. Uh, uh, a guy named Michael Lee, I don't know if you remember him or not, but if you're a strong historian, he played football with me on the 1982 National Championship team at Northwest Mississippi Junior College. He's a barber over there now. He's got his own little barber shop on Town Square. But man, he was a good looking dude, and he got trained by Donnie, and Jerry Jarrett fell in love with him, put him with Paul Diamond, put the belts on him within his
Yeah.
first week, and about a month later, his wife goes, either you're quitting or I'm gone, and so he quit. And I
Wow.
mean, he would have really turned out good. So so Donnie trained a ton of guys. He
Yeah.
was really good. Blade Boudreaux's another guy who had a good little run over there with Randy Hales and them when it was Power Pro. And Blade lives about 50 miles from me now. I talk to him all the time. Harley Race did a territory and actually had Blade as his top babyface. And I thought that was pretty cool. But so I'm riding around the loop with Roger Smith, who was Dirty Roads or a million different gimmicks,
Yeah.
and Donnie, and we go to Louisville, and Lawler had flown from Memphis to Louisville, and they lost his bag. Well, the first thing Donnie told me was always bring your stuff. Well, me and Jerry Lawler, there couldn't be 2 pounds difference. I mean, we're exact same size. And I said, I heard him and he was mad, boy. And I said, excuse me. I said, man, and I showed him my stuff. I said, I got brand new boots, never been worn. I got tights. Because when I first started, I wore exact like him, man. I mean, I even had an elbow pad on my right arm, blah, blah, blah. He goes, I can't wear this stuff. You've never even wore it. I can't wear it first. I said, you're the main event up here tonight. What are you going to do? And he goes, I guess you're right. So he did it, and he was booking. He goes, be at Memphis TV Saturday. And I was there, and he put me and a guy named Johnny Wilhoit, who's one of the new generations with one of the Batten twins.
Right.
And we wrestled against Iron Mike Sharp and Eddie Hot Stuff Gilbert. And Jimmy Hart was the manager. And man, first match ever, because nobody even asked me if I'd ever worked before, nothing. And Donnie had trained me, but Donnie didn't even smarten you up.
Right.
I mean, when I walked in there, I see Jimmy Hart and Jerry Lawler in the same room. I'm like, what in the hell's going on here? I mean, I'm telling you, I was as big a mark, as you could possibly imagine. So, Eddie and them kind of say, hey, okay, here's what we're going to do, and, they were going to beat me, of course, because, Johnny he was kind of a mid-card guy, looked real good.
Yeah.
And so, man, I got out there and again, never had done anything. I'm sure I was pretty snug, but I mean, I watched it. I knew everything they were telling. Eddie Gilbert was, basically Jerry Lawler Jr. I mean, he was. You can't work with that guy. You can't do it. So it went great, man. And Eddie goes, man, how many matches you had? I said, that was my first one ever. And he went crazy. He couldn't believe it. And, man, he fell in love with me. He goes, man, he goes, he was already talking to Bill Watts and them in Mid-South. He goes, you just keep doing what you're doing. And Lawler had a deal with me. I would drive to his house. I would drive his car. He'd be in it. Sometimes he'd be in the back seat booking or something like that, or drawing, or he had a million things going. But man, I worked as many days as I wanted, and he would help me with food. He'd help me with hotels. I mean, he was the best. So sure enough, that's probably a year later, Eddie calls and he goes, I'm gonna have you be the Missing Links protege. And that's when he had Dark Journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there going, Missing Link, Dark Journey. I'd seen him in magazines, of course, I'd never, seen him. And I'm like, I thought about it and I called. I said, man, I don't know, man. I don't feel comfortable with that. And he goes, man, it's a start, and I turned him down. And about a month later, Bill Dundee comes in, takes the book. And at that time, Dundee hated me. He wouldn't even let me do a job on TV. And I mean, and Lawler, didn't really step in and stand up for me, which I didn't ask him to. I mean, I called Eddie back, and Eddie goes, well, it might not be as good a deal as I had for you eventually. He goes, that would have been a big deal. And I said, well, man, I just, but he put me with a guy, Shane Douglas, put us together as a tag team. And man, our first night, we wrestled Brad Armstrong and Tim Horner. And man, we tore this place down. Those guys again were so good. And man, we were young, and man, I mean, it was flying all over. And back then, the crowds, got into it. So I can't even remember what city we were in. Maybe Tulsa. And then the next night, I don't know if you've ever seen this on YouTube, but Tommy Gilbert's the referee, and it's when Terry Taylor's turning heel. And they do a deal. I'd never gotten juice before.
Yeah.
So Tommy was going to get juice for me. He's going to cut me. So Terry, I do a couple of counter moves and make Terry mad, and he pulls his knee. He does something and stops when he pulls his knee pad down and drops his bare knee on my forehead. And Tommy reaches down there. If you'll look, you can see him just go from ear to ear. And I mean, it was so bad on some of the YouTube deals, they've got me blacked out because they almost wouldn't let them play it on TV. I bled so much. I mean, it was crazy. So that was, I got, man, for some reason, with baby faces, the sympathy deal, man, everywhere I went after that, then they were starting to put me and Shane together every night. And we had, Carl Fergie, who's Lawler's cousin, Honky Tonk's cousin. He was kind of mentoring us, and we would ride with him, and so we were really doing good. So we do a show in the Summit in Houston. That's Joel Osteen is preaching there now,
Right.
and I mean, this is a mixed card with all the NWA guys there. Dusty, Steamboat, Flair, Road Warriors. And man, me and Shane wrestled against Pez and Tiger Conway Jr., the opening match. And man, we get in the back and Pee Wee Anderson comes and says, "Hey man, Dusty wants to see y'all in his office." I'm like, "Oh man, we're getting fired first night." So they lead us up to this office, and Dusty's in a big one of those suites, because they put the Houston Rockets played there too.
Right.
And he's in this suite, so you can look down and see the matches, and it's him and ZZ Top. And I mean, this is when this is the mid '80s. ZZ Top, hot as fire, and Dusty looks at us. He goes, "Shane and Davey, we gonna make y'all the next Rock and Roll Express, baby." And so we're like, "All right," we're high fiving. We go, and so we had another little town, maybe Lake Charles, and then the big TV taping was going to be in New Orleans. They'd usually do 3, 4, 5 tapes back in those days.
Yeah.
And man, they had us on every one, putting us over. So we go pulling up, and in the parking lot, Ric Flair and Eddie are having a real fight out in the parking lot. Nobody's out there to break them, nothing. So we jump out of the car and we go break them up. And man, Eddie's bad, boy. Flair had come in, and Eddie was the Mid-South booker. So he had his little room, said, Eddie Gilbert, and he had all this stuff in there. He got there way earlier than somebody like Flair would get there.
Right.
And man, Flair tore a sign down, threw all this stuff out the hall or whatever. And man, Eddie I guess that's just too much for him. And so Eddie basically said, "Either you're with me or you're here." So me, Eddie's brother Doug, Gary Young, and some other poor misguided soul all left. So that could have been my first break.
Yeah.
And they actually came back and got Shane probably 6 weeks later and put him with Steamboat, and they were like the world champs, for a little while. And he I still talk to him all the time. He went on, had a great career as the franchise with ECW, and didn't quite do so good the WCW and the WWE. Some of those guys, and I mean, I love him. I talk to him. I'll be driving down the road and talk to him 2 or 3 hours, but he's from Pittsburgh, and man, some of those guys from up north, man, they're a little on the, I don't know, grumpy side, and man, he just least little thing, man, he'd get mad, but he's doing good, so God bless him. But the thing that happened in Mid-South that really helped me was meeting Brad Armstrong. Man, Brad would help. Brad and Tim Horner and Sting would help me and Shane. Sting actually would let us stay at his house because he knew we had no money and feed us. And but Brad and Tim would help us work out, show us how to eat, show us stuff. And so I get a call when Mid-South gets dissolved into WCW. The very last night of Mid-South, they have a show, and this was the Convocation Center at Arkansas State in Jonesboro.
Mm-hmm.
First show ever, sold out. The main event's supposed to be like Terry Taylor against Nikita Koloff. No, it was one of the guys with UWF who, just saw the writing on the wall and didn't show up. I can't remember which one. So Eddie lets me wrestle against Terry Taylor in the main event for the World TV title. This is a Saturday night. The next day, they're doing one of the first pay-per-views, TV title versus TV title with Nikita Koloff, I believe.
Would that have been when DiBiase left?
Nah, that was way after that.
Okay.
DiBiase and Junkyard Dog and all them left just before I came. We had like Dr. Death against Big Boss Man was the main event, and Tim and I can't even remember who the heel team was. Oh, it was Sting and Steiner, and Eddie was managing them. But so I go out there, and match goes 30, 40 minutes. Terry Taylor, he gets a bad rap sometimes because of the Red Rooster deal and all that. But when Terry Taylor wants to go, Terry Taylor, to me, was right in the long lines of Shawn Michaels. I mean, because he had that look. He could do it all. He had a body. I mean, again, you got to be in the right place at the right time. I mean, take a guy like Stone Cold. How many different gimmicks did he have before he finally got over?
Right.
And he was on the last one. So if that wouldn't have got over, the whole business would be different. But I mean, Terry Taylor, he made me look like I knew what I was doing. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was freaking out. People were going. I mean, you can't imagine this. This is a huge show. People are going nuts, and he has me roll him up, and Tommy Gilbert's the referee and counts to 3, and I'm like, oh my God. Tommy gets the belt, hands it to me. People are going nuts. I've done falling out of the ring, and everybody's hugging me, and I'm scared to even go back to the dressing room. And I get back here, and Eddie's got this way he'd look at you, his head kind of tilted over to the side when he's mad. He goes, "What in the hell did you just do?" I'm like, "Man, I swear, man." And Terry yelling, he shot on me. He hooked me. And Tommy Gilbert's going, "What?" And they were all just ganging up on me. And after about 30 seconds, they just started dying laughing. It was like the biggest rib ever. And so, back then there was no TV, no internet, none of that. So they just give Terry the belt, and he goes and wrestles Nikita the next day, and nobody ever knew, unless you were in that building that night, But I mean, man, that was a pretty big highlight, though. But so Brad told his dad about me. So I go then. Burt Prentice, I can't even remember what he was going as back then. Chris Love or something like that.
Yeah.
He was one of the guys with that WOW, and it was based out of Pensacola.
Right.
And that Jerry Stubbs was there, and Bad Company, Paul Diamond and Pat Tanaka were there. Fred Ottman was there. But they put me, I was wrestling Bob Holly every night. And man, that's another guy, Cornette, basically said, called him the next Bobby Eaton. I mean, he was, I guess he got old and grumpy too, because I hadn't seen him in years. But man, back then he was awesome, man. And we got along great. And I guess he respected me and I respected him. And man, we had some great matches. But that WOW was really good. And, Jerry Stubbs, man, he's another guy, he really had a great career, man. I mean, he had a long run, he had, multiple gimmicks.
Yeah.
And so he was really good, and he helped me out a lot. But he goes, "Hey man, Bob Armstrong was asking me about you today." I said, "Really?" I mean, I'd never met Bob in my life, and
Yeah.
I said, "Well, man, do you got a number on him?" And he goes, "Yeah, back then you had a little book and the
Yeah.
phone numbers and all that." Well, before I could get it, Bob called me. He goes, "Hey, we're starting a territory in Knoxville, and Tommy doesn't want to move to Knoxville. You got to live in Knoxville to do this territory, and we want a babyface tag team to work against the Rock and Roll RPMs." And Johnny Rich, who I'd met Johnny when he was Roy Rogers in Memphis,
Right.
and man, if you can't get along with Johnny Rich, something's wrong with you. I mean, he's the nicest human on earth. And he goes, "How would you like to become Davey Rich?" I said, "I'd love to become Davey Rich, but I knew that, it'd be, we'd be in either the semi-main or the main event every night. So we go up, and that Continental has one last big show there, and they introduce all of us, and and I guess that lasted. I mean, you might know exactly, but I don't think that lasted over 9 months or a year. But man, it was Mike Davis and Tommy Lane. Man, that's got to be the most underrated tag team ever.
Yeah.
I mean, those guys were awesome, man. I mean, we went 30-minute Broadways around the loop 2 or 3 times, then 60, then 90. I mean, to work a 90-minute match and people not walk out, that's tough. And I mean, again, all I was doing is listening and doing, and Bullet and Ron Fuller, and I guess Gordon Soley is probably throwing his 2 cents in there. I mean, man, they were booking angle after angle, and then they brought Tommy in for about a month, and every show. And I, growing up in Memphis, I knew Tommy as a baby face, and I knew but man, I had no idea how over Tommy Rich was. I mean, we went to West Virginia, which was kind of on the outskirts of the USA territory. And man, there were people showing up with these big life-size posters from the late 70s with Tommy Rich. I mean, man, he came out and you'd have thought Elvis Presley was in the building. I mean, it was the most awesome deal ever. And I mean, man, all these guys, that I usually say something about. I mean, man, in the wrestling business, there's people with $1 million bodies. There's people who can talk. There's people who can wrestle. But those guys that's got it all, I mean, that it factor, man, Tommy had it, and what happened, I mean, all of us probably got our own opinions, but man, that dude was one of the best ever. And I mean, at that time, he still looked pretty good, and he was showing up. And I mean, it was great. So we did that little deal, and uh, Ron Fuller and Bob Pope. And I don't know if Gordon owned a little bit of that too, because I'm sure they had to do something to get him to come there.
Right.
But they sold back to David Woods, who owned Continental. And at that time, man, Continental had really taken a fall.
Yeah.
And Eddie was still booking, and he had probably a month booked, but before we even got there, and they ran almost the exact same thing. We ran a big USA show, Doug Furnace against Jerry Lawler, all the blow offs, Scott Armstrong against Nelson Royal. He beat him for the US tag belts. They finally put me and Johnny over for the tag belts. I mean, all this stuff, went to a deal, and Continental guys were on the card, but at that time, Shane and Sid were going to WCW, so it's really the switch over of all the guys and everything.
Yeah.
So we went to Continental, and And lo and behold, about 6 months into it, Dundee gets the book. and I spent a lot of time with him in USA, and I thought we'd kind of gotten everything behind us. I don't know if he thought I was a Jerry Lawler wannabe, or but for some reason he didn't like me. But as
Yeah.
time went on, and man, the last couple times one time he even told me, he goes, "Man, I should have used you." He goes, "Man, I apologize." I said, "You know what, man? It all turned out." I
Yeah.
said, I got to do more things than I ever dreamed I would do. I'm still alive. I started the exact same day as Billy Travis and Tracy Smothers. And Billy's been gone for well over 20 years. And I think Tracy's been gone for 5 years now. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just amazing, man. And it just, the, I, I'm not going to say I was an angel, but the business didn't suck me in and spit me out like it did those guys,
Yeah.
and just thank God, and I have a regular job. I'll be heading to Las Vegas tomorrow. I got a big
Nice.
convention, and I travel, every week, just like I'm doing wrestling. I just get beat up mentally instead of physically now. So, but no, so we did that, and as uh, uh, Dundee put him and Adrian Street as the babyface team. So about that time, Cornette called us about Smoky Mountain,
Right.
and for some reason we go up, and they were going to put us against the Heavenly Bodies. And we worked them a couple times. Maybe did their first Smoky Mountain show or whatever. The big, maybe I think it was a pay-per-view. And all of a sudden, man, uh, Cornette comes and says, "Well, Johnny's told me that he doesn't want to do this full time anymore," and he didn't even say anything to me. But I knew. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes you just know the end is near, and so we said, "Well, we'll do a few more deals." And he had said, "Hey, I'd like to give you a push as a singles wrestler." So we're in a little town called Harlan, Kentucky. We're wrestling against them, and I did a cross body block off the second rope, the old Dundee move where you shoot them into the turnbuckle and jump up on the rope and come out with a flying body press or whatever you want to call it, cross
Yeah.
body. And man, my leg went behind me and Tom some way, and I broke my tibia and fibula in 7 places right in the middle of the
Wow.
ring.
Oh my
And
God.
so that's probably 92, 93. And I went back and did TVs for WCW, did TVs for WWE, but I just always had that little fear in the back of my mind. I'd do anything before that. I mean,
Yeah.
it didn't matter. I mean, I let Bam Bam Bigelow, when he first started, he wrestled me and Tracy around the loop, and he would do a deal where he'd shoot Tracy out, and he'd pick me up over his head and throw me like Hulk Hogan through Rocky, and Tracy would catch me sometimes. and, I mean, all that stuff, I wasn't scared to do anything, but man, that little bit of fear, and I don't know, I guess I've been in the business. I did it 84 to about 99 without doing any kind of other job. And then about 99, I said, "Man, I better parlay this into something else." And
Right.
so but I was fortunate, got to either wrestle or be on cards or ride with, all of my childhood heroes. I mean, Jerry Lawler was definitely my biggest hero ever. And man, I spent, millions of miles, it seems like, riding with him and playing football and softball. And I mean, it's one of those deals. I saw Elvis one time said, every dream I ever dreamed came true. And that's kind of with me. People go, "Well, all you did was get beat." And I said, "Well, I wouldn't say that." I said, I had my moments.
Yeah.
And again, I think a job boy is, if somebody wrestles, only on TV and never does any house shows, you know, and never has an offensive move and just gets squashed every match. Okay, but they quit doing that. I guess in the '90s. I mean,
Yeah.
they wanted more competitive matches, and I wrestled Terry Funk. It's on YouTube when he was fixing to do. I think it was his last run against Flair. And man, we went out there, and man, that joker, we went all over the building, and man, I mean, it was like a real match. I mean, he was,
Yeah.
guys like that who, I mean, number one, it shows that they respect you, and I just have never understood, why you'd want to go out there and just squash somebody. I mean, what have you done? If you have
Yeah.
a competitive back and forth match, it's like, man, that dude's pretty tough. That guy gave him a fight, but boy, he beat him in the end. But, again, everything's changed. The last time I went was probably 3 months ago. Our buddy Brian Armstrong, Road Dog, got me a handful of tickets, and I took a bunch of people from my gym to the Cajun Dome, and they're coming back in March. So I guess I'm gonna have to hit old Road Dog up again. But no, I mean it's just so different. You know, you know, you're a lot younger than me, but when I grew up, man, people hated the heels. Hey, I mean, I'm talking about hate, and
Yeah.
they love the baby faces. Well, when I went this night, I couldn't have told you who the heel or the baby face. Everybody got cheered.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody had their little catchphrases. Everybody had, I mean, I don't know, but that place was packed. I mean, and,
Yeah.
so they're doing something right, but I mean, it's just, the people who never got to see, I don't even know if see, you can go back and watch tapes, just like you said, but I mean, people who got to experience and live through a real angle with Jerry Lawler against Jackie Fargo or Big Al Green against Jerry Jarrett. I mean, the Goliath against the little guy who everybody loved. And, you get mad when he gets beat up and he never
Yeah.
gives up. And, I mean, it just seems like all that's gone, but maybe
And
that's
you can
just
go
something.
back and watch the tapes, but you like you said, you can't really appreciate and experience it, especially like being in the arenas, man. Like,
Oh my God.
my dad used to take me and my buddy down to the Lavender Coliseum in Columbus, the
Mm.
Continental shows and the
Oh
Dupree
yeah.
and Memphis shows. And I mean, being there in the crowd and seeing those people who were ready to hit that ring,
Oh man.
when their guy was getting beat up, and I
Yeah.
mean, I don't claim to be smart back then, but I mean, I understood enough to like, I don't want to get my butt in that ring.
You
Like,
ain't kidding.
if he's doing that to Jerry Lawler, he'll sure mess me up,
Oh, I know. And man, I'm talking about the big ones, like when the Freebirds, put the stuff in JYD's eyes,
Oh yeah,
when Buddy and Dutch, jumped on Jeff Jarrett, I mean, I'm talking about the stuff that sold out everywhere it went. I mean, man, it's just, I don't know. And then, there was such an art, I don't know. You're young. You probably don't. I know you've heard of him, but Jackie Fargo, man,
oh yeah,
that guy, man, you talking about the it factor. I mean, some people, you have people, well, Hogan, he can't really wrestle or all that, but man, as much as he did it, and if you'll watch his matches, man, he got it. I mean, plus he had the tailor made body,
yeah,
and they put him with you know all American guy against the Iron Sheik. I mean, carrying the Iranian flag, whatever flag. I mean, that's just a tailor made gimmick. We had Tojo Yamamoto, and I mean, people just hated that dude, man. I mean, and I don't know. It's just sad because there's some great fans, man. Everywhere I go, I always bring it up, and I can tell the minute I say it if somebody likes it or they don't like it. If they like it, man, I'm in like Flynn. If they don't, I just go to something. I
Yeah.
try to piggyback on the football deal. But I mean, man, in Portland area, they had Don Owens. I mean, all these different guys that these different territories and the different heroes. I mean, we're from Memphis, or you're kind of from that area, so
Yeah.
Jerry Lawler from the Continental. You had Bullet Bob, Ron. I mean, Robert Fuller, Jimmy Golden. And then you had in South Texas, you had Tully Blanchard. And then over in Houston, I guess Junkyard Dog and those guys, but Von Erichs. I mean, everybody had that that strong baby face deal, and they could just feed them in these heels. So it was awesome. But again, it's a whole different ball game, but they're dealing with a lot more money. I mean, they got the TV contracts. One of the things I really enjoyed, and I don't know how I stumbled on it, but it was the angles that you were writing on the internet. And I'm sitting there reading these and I'm thinking, because you're going to laugh. What little bit I did do, I can't remember half of it. So
Right.
I called Johnny Rich and I said, man, do you remember this or this or this? And he's even worse than me. And he's like, I think so. And I think I even might have reached out to you. And I'm like, man,
Yeah,
did
you
this
did.
really happen? Or just, but I mean, man, I tell you, I wish you'd have been the booker. And if you'd have came up and took over the USA book, maybe it'd still be open. You never know.
Yeah, that was super cool. Yeah, when you reached out and told me that, I sent it to my friends on the message board. I was like, "Hey, check this out," and they were all like, "Oh my gosh, that's wild that
Oh, it
somebody
was
that you're writing
so
about
cool.
actually read it and liked it."
Oh,
So
I'm sitting there. It's one of those deals like watching something on Netflix. I'll watch the whole series. I'm reading, so, but nah, I mean, man, and again, I mean, with your creative mind, the way you did that, and you got to be bought into it. You can't just sit there and scribble something like that down. It's got to be in your blood. I'll tell you a funny story. I cover the West Coast now, and so I I have to fly into Los Angeles to drive up to Bakersfield. And I got back to Los Angeles real early, so I'm kind of walking around this big outdoor mall with like Dave and Buster's and all that. And I see WOW, and I'm thinking, what in the world could that be? And it says Suite 114. I look, I'm at 110. I said,
yeah,
well, I'm fixing to find out. So I walk in and I hear a guy named go, Davey Rich. And I look and it's Bambi,
yeah.
back in our day. She's been the general manager of that WOW for like 20 years. It's
Wow.
like the top rated syndicated show. I mean, it's basically like the Glow Wrestling. It's
Yeah.
all girls, and Nigel Sherrod is, he's got a big role in it, and I mean, it's just amazing. But boy, I sat there. They got like three rings, the most awesome rings I've ever seen, set up in this big warehouse looking deal, and they've got 50 girls all under contract, every shape, size, gimmick you ever seen, and they're in there 8 hours a day, and then they do TVs just like the other places. They just don't do live shows. And
Wow.
I mean, and man, I'm like sitting there thinking, people probably never really took Bambi too seriously. I think I've been on 100 cards with her against Peggy Lee Leather, and
Yeah.
Bambi was always the baby face, and they were both trained by Moolah, which I guess trained 80% of the girls back in that
Yeah.
day. But man, just to appreciate and to see, I mean, uh, she just had complete command of this deal. They had it laid out. Those girls listened to she was like Vince McMahon. And then the owner of that deal is that Jeannie Buss, who owns the Lakers.
Oh, I
And
didn't know that.
oh
Wow.
yeah, and that's what I asked when he told me that. I said, "She's not coming by here, Dave." And he goes, "No, she was like, off subject. She like posed in Playboy before,
Yeah.
and dated I don't know if she married him, but Phil Jackson. So she's
Yeah.
quite the character herself. But I know that's kind of getting off the beaten path. But again, it just goes back in those days, the Jerry Lawlers, the Dutch Mantels, the Jerry Jarretts, the Dusty Rhodeses, these guys who do the book, and Eddie Gilbert, man, it was their whole life. That's all they did was think up angles and gimmicks and what they could do next. And it's just amazing, the things that they came up with. And you know I just don't understand. I have no idea how they can come up with stuff now that hadn't been done, at least to some sort of extent before.
Yeah. And they
So
really don't. Most of it is. If you really look hard at it, you're like, that's rooted in this, and you can kind of
yeah,
pick it out.
yeah. And back in the day, they may do a gimmick or an angle here. I mean, like when Dundee went to Mid South and booked, everything he did was all the stuff that they did in Memphis. That's
Yep.
why he had such a good run. And, he carried the Rock and Roll Express. And, he just, took basically the Tennessee territory and went over there and did it and had a great run with it, so. But I don't know. It's man, it was something that I'll never ever, nothing will ever take its place as the best part of my life. I still talk to Carl Fergie's and Jerry Calhoun's and Doug Gilbert. Me and Doug are big Tennessee fans, so we cry on each other's shoulders about how bad we are now. But Tommy some. Shane some, just it's just relationships that you always have. It's like playing on a big football team, and man, I just to see the guys and to reminisce, and
Yeah.
it's a shame, man. I mean, I'm 61. And man, I was a young punk, so most of those guys who were my heroes have either already passed or looking, really bad, or they just
Yeah.
had really, 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 tough ways to go. I mean, it wasn't like we were taking, real good care of our bodies and running up and down the roads and acting crazy. So
I
it's
mean, you meet people in life that take one bad fall and they're on disability and they're never the same. I mean, and wrestlers are taking falls that are the
man.
equivalent of that numerous times every night of their life. The fact that any of you guys get around is a minor miracle, quite
I,
honestly.
I've got 9 fusions in my neck and 2 cages. So, but man, at 4 a.m. I was working out. I'll tell you another little funny story. Me, and I'm sure you remember Reggie B. Fine,
Oh yeah.
Tony Williams.
Yep.
Tony was Brian Lawler's first partner, and The Rock rode together, when Rock was working in Memphis. And
Yeah.
I guess this was his second tryout. And so we rode the whole week together. And, I got along with him great because he had played football for University of Miami, right? And
Yeah.
I told him that first day, I said, man, I want to work out with you. And he goes, yeah, man, meet me in the lobby in the morning. So I'm down there about 7 o'clock. I'm ready to roll. And he comes walking down the hall. And I said, you ready, man? He goes, I've already been. I said, well, what? He goes, I go at 4 a.m. every day. So the next 3 days I went with him. But man, I started doing that. Of course, I hadn't had the same results he's got. But I even make my poor little daughter, my daughter's 16, she's a little volleyball player. But I make her go at 4 a.m. when I'm here. I'm probably
Yeah.
home 150 days a year, so but it's I don't know. The relationships that I got, the friendships. When I know I'm going to see people. Being from where you're from, I'm sure you heard of King Cobra before. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'll go back to Memphis for Christmas, and I'll try to see the King. I'll try to see Cobra. I know I'll see Carl. So it's just some of those guys, and I'll certainly think about Donnie Bass. He's gone too. So it's just that's the sad part. Some of the really really good guys, they just you know they go so early. But
Yeah. Don Bass
that's
is a great guy. I
oh
got
man,
into business like around 97 and did just like little local stuff there around like Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee. And I worked there in Corinth with Donnie Bass like every Friday night for 2 or 3 years. And man, just to sit in the corner and listen to Don Bass tell stories was worth every, I mean, the guy was hilarious,
and you
and
know
so
what?
knowledgeable.
He could have booked the territory easily too. I mean, he
Absolutely.
had and that's Ken Wayne, man. Lawler or Jarrett would have never let Ken Wayne have the book. Ken Wayne, if you'll, again, I'm not even sure what year it was. Man, Ken Wayne did great, man. I mean, stop and look at it. Buddy Wayne's his dad. He's
Yeah.
been around the business since the day he was born. He had a great mind too. Again, it's these guys who are 100% vested, and that's all they think about. That
Yeah.
they just idea after idea, and not everybody they all work, but if half of them do, that's why I like the USA territory. When I grew up in Memphis, it just seemed like it was one or two angles on a card. The rest of it was just matches. Man, USA had 5 matches in the opening match. It was Hector Guerrero against, Hector against Todd Morton. And man, they had that, they had an angle.
Yeah.
Every single match meant something. Whereas some other territories, they just they had that one superstar, and they had the whole deal, and they were drawing, and you could basically, if nobody showed up but them, everybody'd still be happy. Just fill in the other card, other
Right.
part of the card, So, but nah, man, it was just like a little kid whose dream, I found Aladdin's lamp, and my dreams came true, and still have a few buddies I can still talk to and talk about some of those stories and all that good stuff, and every now and then somebody will have a show that I'll be able to make. And did you ever know Alvin Wallace over there in Athens, or is that too?
No, I know the name and did a couple of shows over there back years ago. I was trained by Sammy Hall,
Oh yeah, I knew
who
Sammy.
he was around in Mid South back in the day,
Oh yeah, I
and
knew
so
him.
he took us
He
over to
was
work for
commissioner.
Alvin a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, the commissioner gimmick there.
What Thurman Dolan? I'm sure you knew Thurman.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Thurman always did me right. Me and Cobra, King Cobra, and Ira Reese. And if you really watch, they had a guy come through. He looked great, but he just never caught on. They called him Snowman. Eddie Crawford was his
Eddie
name,
Crawford.
and we'd go over there, and man, Cobra, man, for some reason, Snowman, he didn't trust none of those DiBiase, none of those guys, and they tried to give him the junkyard dog push, and it just never worked. And but man, Cobra would put the bridle on him, and he'd listen to Cobra, and I mean, he looked great. I mean, so they'd have
Oh yeah.
great matches. People would get into them, but I don't. Again, just I guess it just wasn't meant to be for it
Well,
to
they
Mid
did
South.
that deal with him in the '90s where he come in and won the unified title off of Lawler,
Yeah,
and then he didn't want to drop it back to him,
yeah,
and they had
yeah,
he went and pawned it or something as the story goes, and that was
yeah,
a wild
yeah.
affair.
See, I don't understand. I mean, even that Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels deal. I mean, man, when you're leaving a territory, and a guy like Bret Hart, who grew up with his dad owning a territory, you can't take the belt with you. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more to it than what I know, but I never understood all the screw job and all that. I mean,
Yeah.
it just, and hey, they might be working us all. It might have.
I'm about half convinced that that's kind of the deal, but who will
Yeah.
ever really know? But speaking of that era, like I have always said, and I'd be interested to see if you agree that if Eddie Gilbert had lived, I think his legacy probably would have been bigger as a writer slash booker in the '90s TV era, the Attitude Era, the big time TV competitive era. Whether he worked for Vince or he worked for WCW, the kind of creative ideas he had back then, they were a lot of them were kind of ahead of their time. I think he would have thrived in the '90s
Oh,
as a
way
booker.
ahead. I think, and this again, this is just me. I've got a little bit more insight than your regular fan. You know, the McMahons loved Eddie Gilbert. He was up there as a kid working for Vince McMahon Sr., and he had that car wreck that broke
Yeah,
his neck. And there is not a doubt in my mind that eventually Vince wouldn't have put him in some role, and Vince would have went crazy because I don't know how much you do him, but I'm telling you, there was zero difference between him and his mind and Jerry Lawler. I
yeah,
mean, they were both clones of each other. Of course, Lawler's a little bigger, and I mean, again, but man, Eddie just, he had his arms wrapped around it. He's always thinking of stuff. And again, with his size, I don't know how, and I think he was smart enough, due to that injury when he was young. I think he'd have been fine with just doing the writing. Maybe even a manager. I don't even know now if they even have managers. Uh, a manager who really like a Dr. Ken Ramey or, Jimmy Kent, or Cornette,
yeah.
somebody who really meant something, not Paul Lee walking around out there. I mean, I guess he just talks for Brock, but I really don't know, I can't even really, remember the last manager that they had, I mean,
It's
so.
been years. It's
Yeah,
been
and
years.
I thought that was a great part of the business. I mean, you know, uh, I'm having a senior moment, but man, back in the day, man, seeing somebody, Jimmy Hart had as much heat as anybody when I first started. I mean, that more people in those towns and stuff want to see him get killed, and nobody could ever really get their hands on him. And so I just, man, I think that's a part, just another part of the business that's went awry. But no, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I agree 100%. Eddie Gilbert would have been, one of a kind. Uh, to me, he already is. But I mean, for what short little bit. But oh no, he'd still, he'd be, right up there. Still doing something with somebody now, especially with AEW and
Oh yeah.
a couple other ones opening up. He was kind of a little, kind of a rebel or an outlaw. He'd probably be
He
with
would have went awry
AEW.
Vince McMahon at some point, I'm sure, and
Oh
went into
yeah, yeah,
AEW.
yeah, yeah,
They need him. Lord
yeah,
knows they need him with
yeah.
the writing they have. But
I,
um,
I I lived in Jacksonville when that started, and I was there 3 years, and I never went and saw. I saw a couple of the boys at the gym and stuff like that, but I always wanted to. Jim Ross was always extremely nice to me. Uh, me and Marcus Dupree are big buddies, and they were. We tried to do a little deal in Memphis, and try to get Marcus ready because Jim Ross would have signed Marcus in a heartbeat. And but man, Marcus just couldn't handle the traveling. Man, wrestling's tough, man. In football, you got the off season. You play one game a week. Man, my first 3 years of wrestling, I wrestled over 400 times a year. People are like, wait, there's only 365 days. Well, you got, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. I mean, well, they're doing double shots, and
yeah,
I mean, I used to have a books, I'd keep these books, but my 85, 86, 85 through 90, I was doing 400 shots a year. And I
Oh wow.
mean, again, and I'm sure some of those guys when WWE was doing 3 shows a day, Coco and some of those guys that were trying to get on it, that were getting paid per show versus having a big contract. I'm sure they were trying to get on every show they could. So I mean, I got another little funny one. So I'd played, football at Northwest, and I actually had lived there the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So I had a lot of friends there. So we go back, and I wrestled like Gorgeous George the Third, and they put me over and everything. People went crazy. But at the end, they had a pole battle royal, and everybody was in it except for Lawler.
Yeah.
He didn't want to do it. So one of the Batten twins is supposed to win it. Well, this is when the PYT, Coco and Norvell were there, and they had the long Jerry curls. Well,
Yeah.
they got that grease off their hair and put it up and down that pole. And that poor Batten twin tried to get up there. They even had somebody try to hoist him. And finally, he just said, "I can't do it." And Calhoun goes, "Whoever can get up that pole is going to win." I went up that pole like a daggum squirrel going up a tree, man. I grabbed that, and that's one of the biggest moments. Those people, that place, a whole 4,500 people, and they were,
Right.
it was so awesome. I mean, but that's just some of the fun stuff that happens in those. Another one was Kamala. Kamala was actually from Senatobia. James Sugar Bear Harris was his name.
Yeah.
And man, I don't know if you ever got a chance to see him in a spot show versus like a house show.
I didn't.
Oh my God. He'd come out and he'd act like he got loose from his keeper, and he'd go out in the crowd. Though people in wheelchairs who's never supposed to walk would be running. I mean, it was just the stuff like that. The Stomper was another one that everybody, Mongolian Stomper, everybody was scared of. And I mean, Joe LeDuc. I mean, man, these guys, you could really see how much people were bought in when they would get out and confront. When they're yelling at them when they're in the rings, one thing, but when they get out, they'd
Yeah.
shut way up. I mean, they would. They get up. They come over to that rope or the rail or whatever it might be. I mean, that Stomper was a big man. Joe LeDuc. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
those guys were something, but we probably nobody listening probably ever remembers any of those guys.
Well, if they don't, they should look them up because I
Hey,
mean,
I'm gonna tell you what, that was the glory days. And I've never seen like that WWE channel or whatever that's got the library and
yeah,
supposedly's got everything, but man, that has to be unbelievable. And I always people will tell me, hey, Mid South on this channel or so and so's on this, and me and Shane Douglas and Steve Cox did a Rookie of the Year program, in Mid South, and Gary Young came out wanting to be in it, and Jim Ross, he goes, "I know you've been wrestling 10 years." I mean, it was so funny, So, but I mean, it just the little stuff like that, all those little things, but it's just it was awesome, man. It was fun.
does it amaze you the connection that people have to wrestling? Like, I don't know of many other things where, I mean, I guess sports in general, but just like it's kind, and you kind of touched on it earlier, but just how people will light up when you mention like wrestling from back in the 80s and the Riches and the Armstrongs. Like, people, they've got stories and it always relates to their family. Like, it's really like ingrained in people, and especially in the South.
Yeah, here, they got the Junkyard Dog, the Freebird stories, the Ernie Ladd. I mean, man, everybody's got something. And I mean, Mid South. Oh, I ain't never watched it since Mid South. I mean, it's crazy. I met a guy. This guy was a big executive for Hurt Rentals, and man, my company was having so much trouble getting in. And this guy's the president. He goes, "Excuse me, can I talk to you a second?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "You used to do the wrestling?" And man, his eyes lit up. He goes, "That is the biggest tie that me and my grandfather had. We would stay up till 10:30 on Saturday night every week. Hey, I wasn't supposed to, but I'd stay at his house and he'd let me and we'd watch." And I'm thinking, man, this multi-millionaire guy is sitting here marking out to me, And I mean, and I thought it was hey, we've been friends ever since, And I mean, it just, people got, they got that, I used to go with these people and I used to do this and I did this. And they all got that one story when they got to finally meet their hero or something like that. So,
Exactly.
again, it's just, I don't know. It's that I call it the old school magic. It'll just never be rekindled. I mean, I just don't even know how they'd go about it. With internet and all that, and people. We do the same finish 3 weeks in a row in the Memphis territory.
Yeah.
I mean, now if you did it in Memphis, by the time you got to Louisville the next night, everybody know what had happened. So they'd be smartened up one way or the other. But I do like to see, like that deal. I hadn't seen that whole thing on Netflix with Al Snow, where he's training those guys. I know Danny Davis on that at one time.
Yeah. It's really good.
Yeah.
I recommend it. It's really good.
Yeah, and he's a good dude, man. I mean, he's one of the guys that, man, it's, he just loves it. I mean, it's in his heart. He's not you know, I think, people, the boys always joke. And I saw the other day when some guy did something and, saw Jerry Lawler or something, our boys were calling him a mark. Man, I think you got to be a mark. I mean, I think that's,
Yeah.
I would see these guys come in and, that weren't marks and they would just never get it. They didn't know that emotional attachment, and next thing I know, they'd be gone, I mean, and I saw a bunch come and go, in that Memphis territory, so many started there. There's a place for, careers to be born and careers to die. I mean, if you didn't make it there, I guess they figured you
To
wasn't gonna
circle
make it
back to
anyway.
that real quick, I'm getting ready to start a podcast with my buddy Ray Russell about Memphis in '85, and so we've been
Yep,
watching a lot of that. And so I watched that match that you were just talking about a little while ago with you and Johnny Wilhoit against Iron Mike Sharp and Eddie Gilbert.
yep.
And man, I had no idea that was your first match. I mean, I know
Very
Dave Brown
first
mentioned it was your
time.
Memphis debut, but I never would have guessed
Very,
that, man.
very
That's
first
tremendous.
time ever. And I think it was the same year. I think that was the summer or January. And I think that's the year that I wrestled Eddie, and nobody could make it to the studio. And he beats my brains out the first fall. And the second fall, he's doing it. And I catch him with a sunset flip and beat him 1, 2, 3. And he gets mad. And him and Jimmy Hart throw me into the snow outside,
I
and,
remember, yeah.
and nobody told me nothing about that. And the worst thing about it is they shut that door. I'm out there. It'd been 100 degrees under all them lights, and then there's 100 below out there in that snow. So here I am, and I'm out there in my wrestling tights. People, going up and down the road. I'm knocking on the front door, and the lady's looking at me. I mean, I'm like, "Hey, idiot, let me in." So, but again, Eddie, just came up with all that stuff, and that's that. They had, they they usually did the whole week, laying out that TV. We were together, Memphis on Monday, Louisville on Tuesday, Evansville on Wednesday, and of course Lawler had say on everything. So I would hear a lot of the inside stuff, and just to hear them going back, and sometimes Eddie would ride with us from here to here, and he'd be going, "Oh well, let's do this and let's do that," and Lawler, yeah, and you could tell when something was really going to draw. And I was there when Savage, signed with WWE, and they did a loser leave town match. I mean, Savage didn't have to do that. You talk about Bret Hart, again, that won't drop a belt. Well, Savage could have, just went to New York. Man, he worked out a 2 or 3 week deal and put Lawler over in every one of them towns.
Right.
And tore the house down. Man, I got the utmost. Out of my first 20 matches, about 15 of them were against him in these little spot shows. And man, I tell you, I wish somehow, some way, I would have got to where I was getting some sort of push, or even 5 years later, got to, 'cause he was so good. He was so athletic. I felt like that, my athleticism was right there with him. Do you remember Jerry Oski?
Yes.
I think that was 85. I was always told, you might, tell me I'm a mark, but everybody always told me he was Andre's son.
I've heard that. I haven't heard it from any reliable sources or, any definitive things, but I've read that at different times.
I'm trying to think who all was in the territory. We were all out one night. Of course, Tracy Smothers, Pat, Tanaka, Paul Diamond, and we were all ribbing him about it. And he was just laughing. That dude, he was chiseled out of stone, and they threw him right in there with Savage. And man, again, you go back to that it factor. Savage is one of those guys could have a match with a broom handle. I would actually go out and watch. It was, it was, poetry in motion, man. And that dude, again, you just wonder, and I actually teamed up with him a few times in WWE, just getting squashed, and I think, why on earth this dude looks like damn, he looked like Magnum TA, his body,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking he's a good looking dude, and so I don't know. And hey, who knows? Maybe Andre, knew what the business would do to him and told the promoters, hey, do not give him a push or I'm not working for you. You never know.
Yeah, there's no telling.
I would, without being a mark, I would like to, there's some things like that I'd like to know, really, because I rode with him a lot and we were the same age, we'd go out, Billy Travis, me, him, Tracy, Pat Tanaka, Paul Diamond. There was a guy named JT Southern.
Yeah.
We were all, crazy in that little Memphis era, and that'd be very interesting to know, what happened. But no, that 85, it was still big enough that it was still drawing. You have an Austin Idol come in on a regular basis. Handsome Jimmy would still come back some. One of the funniest times ever. You said you're from Aberdeen. We went to Pontotoc, Mississippi. I'm driving. Lawler's on the passenger side. Plowboy Frazier, Austin Idol, and Handsome Jimmy are in the back.
Oh my gosh.
Let me tell you, I never have laughed. I would pay them to let me drive that car. I never laughed so hard in my life. Of course, Idol had the biggest mouth, and man, he was wearing poor Frazier out. And Frazier was so dumb he couldn't come back with nothing. And every now and then, Handsome Jimmy would help him with one, or Lawler would help him, and that even make Idol matter. So it was a classic. But I bet Pontotoc, Mississippi never saw so much star power in one night.
Goodness, no, definitely not. One more quick question. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Oh no, you're
This
good.
is just more for me than anything else. Do you remember a show down in Columbus, Mississippi? It would have been around 96, 95, 96. I was in college at the time. And it was like a radio DJ named MJ was doing this show at the Lavender Coliseum. Carl Fergie was on it. You did some of the shows. Steve Armstrong. I think Bob was in a couple of times. But I want to say they did an angle with like you and Steve Armstrong there.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of after the territories had all split up, and we did Philadelphia, Mississippi. Do you remember Sam Lowe, who was the photographer, and they did a
Yes.
deal with him? They called him Sam Bass Lowe.
Yep.
Me and Carl are in the ring, and I got him in the front face lock. And I mean, this is like, seemed like it was a town called Ackerman, Mississippi.
Yep. And
I
definitely know where
mean,
that is.
it was packed. I mean, standing room only, and all of a sudden a fight breaks out. And I got Carl goes turn. You know, I got him in the front face lock. He goes, turn me towards that. So I kind of roll over and I said, some Mark's getting his ass beaten. And Carl goes, that Mark is Sam. And somebody got a hold of Sam. And
Oh,
man, I said, go get him. So I let go of Carl and he ran out there. But Sam was not really smart. Well, he was smart in the business, but he didn't know no better. And I
yeah.
mean, man, he had heat down there, just the old school manager. One of them old rednecks done pulled him into the crowd. They didn't engulfed him. But no, I remember those shows. Columbus, Mississippi, man. That place. Oh, I never was there, and it wasn't good. I mean, that was a great wrestling town. That Lavender Coliseum. I love that place.
I got a lot of memories there. I was going to college up in Booneville at the time at Northeast, and was coming back once a month to see those shows down in Columbus. Because to me, it was a novelty to see, the Riches feuding with the Armstrongs. Because you
Oh
guys
yeah,
had always been baby faces, and they were always baby faces.
yeah,
But that was around the time, Bob was working heel in Memphis because they had that Smoky Mountain versus
yeah.
USWA angle, and so Bob was a heel, which that was fun to see.
Oh,
Bob
hey,
was a heel, and Brian was coming in as a heel, and Tracy and everybody, and so they kind of played off that down there in Columbus against y'all, and that was some
well,
fun
let me
stuff.
tell you something. I mean, Brad Armstrong, man, he's one of the he. I don't I don't know how to word it, but man, he was one of the best ever. The boys loved him. They never put him on the right gimmick or in the right angle. I mean, man, in the back, in the dressing room, he's the funniest dude ever. I mean, everybody would listen when he talked. I mean, he was awesome. Everybody loved him, and he could out wrestle anybody. And I don't know why, but Bullet is a man's man. I mean, that dude, not only for him creating Davey Rich and I got to, thank Brad for that too. And, that me, Scott Armstrong, and Johnny were the original party boys. And Scott broke his leg. And so he had to take so much time off that, with me and Johnny just, pressed on just as a regular tag team. But I mean, man, people don't understand. And it's so hard to get it from those tapes. But as far as respect in the dressing room and being able to, to me, the best wrestlers are your Jerry Lawlers, your Shawn Michaels, your Steve, all the guys who can be a heel, go on a commercial break, come back, be a baby face, and make everybody love them again. Just by an interview or something. I
Yep.
mean, can work heel, can work baby face. I mean, a great baby face is good or a great heel is good, but if you can't do both, and man, Bullet, man, when he did finally turn heel, they did it so good, that I mean, it meant something. And that's the deal. Some guys just went back and forth so many times that, you're like, it got to where, you know, you couldn't even really keep up with it, but man, those guys, like,
Idol was kind of one of those guys that flip
yeah,
flopped a
just
lot.
you just never knew, But he had that it factor. Austin
Oh
Idol,
yeah.
man, he just I don't know if he wanted too much money, but I picked him up from the Memphis airport, carried him to the Coliseum. Him get mad at Lawler and get his stuff and leave, and not wrestle, not do nothing. I'm thinking, why would you get on a plane and fly all the way to Memphis? And I mean, I know he had to get a hotel and all that and then
Yeah.
go back. I mean, but man, it's just so dumb. And that by then it's got to where there was only 5 or 6 territories left. Then it wasn't
Yeah.
like there was 40 territories, and you could go anywhere. That's just some of the stuff. And I mean, if you ask him now, uh, I'd be interested to see what he'd say. But man, me and him worked out together. We traveled together. I love Austin Idol. I thought he was, to be Iron Mike McCord and to have an accent and transform his whole character and come back and be even bigger and better than he ever was. I mean, again, that's that it factor coming out, and there's a handful of them that has it, and then some guys were lucky to get put against those guys, and naturally those guys are going to make them look, that there's a good angle written up, and they did their part. People go, oh man, that guy could work, and all
Yeah.
he's doing is just holding on, So, but it's being in the right place at the right time, and I mean, I thought Buddy Landell. I never saw anybody with as much charisma as him. I just wonder what would have happened, if he would have ever, not done anything goofy and
Yeah.
gotten the push that he deserved, And hey, what if Tommy would have, stayed on the right path and eventually, not just had a couple day world champion run. Maybe what if he had you know, battled Flair in the later years and gone back and forth because he was so over. I just can't imagine that they couldn't have kept him over. Maybe, and maybe he did his run. Who knows?
He seemed like to me like he was on a trajectory to be right there with Dusty, to be this baby face that you could send around to all the different territories because he had that exposure from Superstation and could have been this overall across. I still really don't know exactly where things went wrong with Tommy, but he
Yeah.
definitely had more potential than what.
Yeah, I just, again, who knows? I mean, some of the stories are tragic, and some of the guys aren't with us anymore. I mean, man, I've never understood why, Brian Lawler didn't get more of a push. I mean,
Yes.
man, I know he wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but hell, he looked good. I mean, he was a muscled up dude, and
Super talented, and he's one like you were
oh,
talking about that he could go from face to heel and be completely
in a
believable.
blink
In
of an
the course
eye.
of one promo, he could turn 3 times and you'd believe it from beginning to end.
Believe it with every fiber of your body.
Because he was kind of like that as a person. You
Oh,
you can love
exactly.
Brian, hate Brian, all in the course of a day.
Yeah. All in a ride down to the gas station. Want to kill him and hug him all at the same time. But no, I mean, just guys that, I mean, the acorn don't fall far from the tree, and to me, his dad's the greatest ever, not a big physical specimen, but man, I mean, they had matches from everybody against Dick the Bruiser to Andre to Hogan, and every one of them are realistic, I mean, Jack Briscoe, Jerry Briscoe, Terry Funk, I mean, the
Gosh,
list
I mean,
goes on.
you can't name a substantial star in wrestling that Jerry Lawler did not get in a ring with.
Not from the 70s to the 90s. I mean, some of
Exactly.
these older, some of the John Cena's and some of those guys
Yeah.
maybe, but let me tell you, man, I mean, back in those glory days at the Mid-South Coliseum, when he came back from that broken leg against Dream Machine, man, I tell you what, man, you never seen anything like it. That Joker came out, they had the smoke and lifted him up out of the platform. Man, that was deafening. I mean, that dude was over, man. He
That's
was
something
over.
people don't understand if they're not from Memphis and weren't there is how over Jerry Lawler was in Memphis. And we're not talking about a superhuman like Hulk Hogan type guy. I mean, Jerry Lawler looked like your dad, but
Yeah, six foot
people loved
220.
him.
So hey man, it's that talent, it's that gift of gab, that it factor, and that man he could work, man. I mean, he
Oh, yeah.
still, I mean, since he had the stroke, he can't do anything. But I mean, up till a year ago, I mean, man, he could go in these little towns and it'd be all these, muscled up, great looking guys. And, he'd go out there with, one of the local guys and tear the house down. Nobody could follow it. I mean,
I mean, I was
70
talking to
years
one of
old.
my, really, really smart marky type friends, that's all about match ratings and all this kind of stuff. And he was saying how I don't understand how Lawler became to be such a star. And I was like, tell me a bad Jerry Lawler match. Tell me the worst Jerry Lawler match you ever saw. And he couldn't
Yeah.
name one.
You just won. I mean, I don't care who was against. I mean, he could wrestle Jimmy Hart and it'd be good. I mean, you tell
Andy
me how that
Kaufman,
happened.
like one of his biggest
Yeah,
feuds was
Andy
against a
Kaufman.
skinny comedian, and it worked.
Who else could do that segment on David Letterman and have it be part of TV history?
Yeah.
Name me one of the other boys who could carry that off. I mean, man, he just he had it. He's got that gift of gab. He knows what to say, when to say it, and I mean that's what made that whole era the greatest ever. And I mean, some people grew up down here, and they got the Bob Roots and the JYDs and the Ernie Lads and Tony Atlases. And man, all those guys were great. But man, I'd put Memphis wrestling against any of them. But this is where they grew up. This is what they know. And I mean, man, I love to hear them talk about it.
The thing that I think a lot of people I don't think really understand that just from a fan perspective, is like Hulk Hogan could come to Madison Square Garden once a month and pack it out and go to all these different places once a month. But Memphis wrestling was every Monday night. You were packing that Coliseum to see basically Jerry Lawler and who he was going to wrestle that Monday. I mean, yes, there were other guys, the Fabs and
from
plenty of others, but
1972, man.
yes,
72. I mean, every Monday night and going around the territory. I mean, it was 6, 7 days a week. And I mean, it just blows me away. I mean, you go, like you said, that Madison Square Garden, and it may not even be once a month. It may even be once, every 3 months.
2 or 3, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the big ones, and once they got hot, the less they went there, the better they did. I mean, that way they didn't, make the people tired of it. So I don't
when you
know,
look at
man.
the size of New York City compared to how many people they were drawing, when you look at the size of Memphis compared to how many people they were drawing, and then say that they were that on a weekly basis.
Yep.
That's I don't think it'll ever be anything will ever come close to it again. There's
no, and you wonder, and I don't know, maybe they got the next star, but that night I went, I think it's Rikishi's sons.
Yeah.
Were like the tag team, and you know what? I'm an old school guy. Take what I say with a grain. Man, I don't think those guys would have made it in Memphis. I saw nothing that made me think, man, they'd have been great back then. I mean, they had one guy, and I can't even think of who it was. Everybody looked the same, though, man. I mean, everybody had little catchphrases. Of course, all the people knew them, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's again, I'm an old fart, and I'm never gonna. No matter what they did, I'd say, oh, that's still in old school. They could draw the whole universe watching the same show and break all the TVs that so many people watching the same thing, and I'd say, oh, it wasn't as good as Lance Russell.
I've finally just accepted I've become that guy. I spend my time watching old wrestling and doing podcasts about old wrestling, and everybody can have their new wrestling. They can like it. I'm not going to spend time arguing with people or putting them down because
oh no, everybody.
Hey, when I was loving this stuff in the 80s, there was some old guy like, man, ain't like it was back in the 50s, I mean, it's just that circle of life, it is what it is.
They had it at Ellis Auditorium before the Coliseum, and I had people say, oh, I'd never go to no Coliseum. Ellis Auditorium is where it happened. And I'm
exactly.
Like, Ellis Auditorium? I was like, holy mackerel. So,
well, Davey, it's been great talking to you, man. I appreciate you doing this.
A guy that really has a bunch of those tapes, and you probably buddies with him. Do you know Bo James?
I do.
Yeah, Bo's the best, man. Yeah, Bo's got everything. I didn't keep anything. I got like 3 T-shirts and a couple of pictures. People always wanting stuff, and I didn't do. Even in Mid-South, I wrestled Eddie one time, and man, somebody sent it to me, but it's just so hard to keep that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, so man, there's so much I'd like to see. And if you ever do dig up any of that Puerto Rico, I'd definitely be interested in that.
Well, I'm on a mission now, so I'm going to do my
There
best
you
to
go.
find something. Best believe if I find it, it's going to go on the channel, and I will
Those
definitely send you a
Hollywood
link.
dolls, the Hollywood dolls were down there at the same time I was there. Jason was there. Um, Hamilton. I'm kind of thinking, is a black guy. I can't think of
Larry?
Larry Hamilton. We had a great crew, man. I enjoyed it. But man, I don't know. I just woke up one day and I was ready to go home.
I hear you.
So,
I've heard some good stories, but I've heard some horror stories
well,
as
this is
well, and of
right
course
after
the
this.
Brody
This is
thing.
after Eddie, and this is after Brody, and
Yeah.
so I was about half nervous the whole time. So, they can do something to Bruce or Brody, they can really, really take care of me.
Exactly, and obviously covered up, and nobody go to jail
Oh,
for
I
it.
know, not even get in trouble. And that same guy, he got on to me about a week before I left. I was wrestling this big old fat guy, so I was making fun of him. Boy, I come back, and that dude backed me up. I mean, he's a small guy. He
Yeah.
wasn't a big dude, but man, he was fired up. And hell, I couldn't even understand him, and then somebody goes, "No comedy, man. Don't do it. This isn't Memphis." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. There'll be no more comedy."
Fair
So
enough.
yeah. Just tell me the rules, please.
But
So
yeah, hopefully I can reach out. I'd like to get Johnny on here and
yeah,
as many
Johnny,
guys from that area as I
Shane,
can.
Carl, Fergie. Those the people I've dropped their names. I think I shot you my number. Anytime you want to call me and get any of their numbers, and I'll call before you and make sure they know you're calling. I mean, all those guys have got more stories, and I don't know how many of them you can put on there. You know. But they're all great. All I mean, it's just it's so good to talk about the old days.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for your
Anytime,
time, and
man, and anytime you need anything, give me a yell.
awesome. Keep in touch, buddy. We'll talk to you soon. Take
All
care.
right, take care, buddy. See you, Jim.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, the podcast that's based on the old school but can still help you find the good stuff from today. Jimmy Street and the Plastic Sheik, Jared, are the undisputed tag team champions of the wrestling podcast world. From thought-provoking topics to superstar interviews to action figure expertise. This team does it all, and all they ask is, give me back my pro wrestling! Every other Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, Davey Rich, David Haskins, what a great guy, and he's a guy that I've pretty much I followed his whole career. I remember him starting out in Memphis, and saw him in Continental, Smoky Mountain, all the way down the line, WCW, those WWF matches. So again, if you want to see a lot of the matches that we talked about here, they're going to be going up on the channel over the course of the next week or two. So keep an eye out over there, and remember, it's Adrian Street Month here on Retro Wrestling Network. We're going to be featuring a ton of great Adrian Street content here. We're going to be doing a couple of recall episodes where we call some of his matches. Not really call the matches. We're not doing commentary. It's basically a podcast over a video. It's basically, me and either broadcast Bob Anderson or Shane Knowles or one of my buddies is going back, watching things and discussing, the match and the people involved in the matches. So we got 2 for Adrian Street coming out this month. We got Butch Reed coming up soon. Tommy Rich, a lot of great stuff. So thank you all for checking out this interview. Again, I really appreciate Davey giving us the time, and what a pleasure to talk to him. And get ready for the next episode of Retro Wrestling Podcast coming real soon. And remember, if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. We got a lot of good stuff going on over here, and we appreciate you being a part of it.